Hello and welcome to Meet Me in the Metaverse. My name is Catherine D. Henry, and I am subject matter expert of Web3 and Metaverse at Media.Monks. I'm joined here by two people. The first is, on my right, is Henry Cowling. Henry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, hi, nice to meet everybody. I'm Henry Cowling, Chief Innovation Officer with Media.Monks. Thanks for having me, Catherine.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm super excited to introduce our special guest today, Forrester's VP and Research Director, Mike Proulx. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me. High five, Catherine. High five.
All right.
Beautiful.
Henry, don't leave me hanging.
I got a wall right in front of me, dude. I can't reach you.
You cross the chasm.
Reality intervened.
Welcome, Mike. Can you take a moment and tell us about your role at Forrester?
I sure can. Yeah, I lead our CMO team. So we like to think of ourselves as essentially wing persons for B2C marketing executives on all things marketing strategy. We provide insights through published content and hands-on guidance.
Awesome. That sounds really fascinating. And I'm super excited because you recently authored a new report by Forrester on the metaverse. Can you tell us a preview of what's in the report?
Sure, a little teaser. So Forrester started covering all things metaverse last year through a bunch of research. We published some blogs on consumer readiness, on NFTs, on what's going on with Meta itself. And then we spent about 4 months doing additional deep research, lots of stakeholder interviews. And about 3 weeks ago, we published our first report called The State of the Metaverse, which represents Forrester's point of view. That was published in March. And then we launched a whole other stream of metaverse related content. So 2 weeks ago, we published Designing for the Metaverse, my colleague David Proulx, which
Cool.
really focuses on experience design. And then just a couple days from when we're recording this, we've got a new report on brands and the metaverse. So that's what's going to be published.
Well, that's obviously our area of expertise here at Media.Monks, and so we're super excited. And we want to share some ideas today because our point of views are similar, but sometimes our forecasts are different. So let's jump into the first topic. What makes the metaverse tick? Now, for us, we think that Web 1 was about information sharing and Web 2 was about connecting people. So, Mike, in your opinion, what drives Web 3?
Well, it's interesting, right? So there's the whole Web3 phenomenon. There's the metaverse, and the question is, how are the two, or if the two are interrelated? Forrester's point of view, which may be different from others, is that while Web3, quote unquote, may be and likely will have components that will help power the metaverse, that the metaverse isn't dependent on Web3. So we believe that what makes the metaverse tick is the promise of interconnectivity, of being able to have my virtual presence, my identity, my items persist. And outside of that, the metaverse, in our opinion, doesn't exist until those things happen.
So why do we have such high expectations for the metaverse to be integrated in a way that nothing else has been to date?
Well, if we look back on the evolution of the web, so Forrester thinks about the metaverse as a 3D experience layer of the internet, where the World Wide Web, haven't said that word in a long time, really is the two-dimensional experience layer, right? So, just like the web, where there are websites and apps and standard protocols, which are very important to make that connectivity work across web applications and websites, the same, we believe, will happen with the 3D experience layer, with what we're calling the metaverse.
Yeah. Henry, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess for me personally, at least, I tend to adopt a slightly broader definition of metaverse. I think the best analogy of metaverse is the evolution of social. For example, like Twitter is not necessarily interoperable with Facebook or with YouTube. Those platforms evolved sort of separately from one another. And yet we still recognize an era of social when social was the most prevalent, or became the most prevalent way for brands to advertise, to engage with their consumers. I think we will see something similar with metaverse, where maybe Roblox will never talk to Decentraland, or maybe they will in some future, but I think the actual mechanics of interoperability, not even so much the tech side, but more like the getting the interests of the various stakeholders to align, is going to be confounding potentially for the evolution of the metaverse. What we'll probably see is the existing spaces become metaverses in their own right, become spaces that are incredibly important, and we'll probably see like a small collection of those rise to become dominant in the space and sort of define the era that we're in.
I couldn't agree more. And actually, I want to move to the next slide because this is basically, we're entering the realm about community and new behaviors. And I think that's a fundamental driver of Web3. And that's some work that we are doing at Media.Monks, and I can't wait to share our next report with you. But, I want to know your view about the early trends and consumer behaviors. Mike, what are some of your views as to what's happening in the metaverse and what we can expect to see and how that pertains to brands?
Yeah, so let's talk about marketer intent and consumer behavior. And there's a disconnect right now that over time will resolve. So the disconnect is that we find when we survey B2C marketing executives, there is major FOMO. Upwards of 76% of B2C marketing executives in the US say that they plan to invest some of their marketing and budget towards the metaverse this year. But then we look on the consumer side, just 34% of US online adults, and it's even less in the UK, say that they're excited for the metaverse. And the harder road to hoe right now has to do with convincing consumers how immersive media and extended reality will actually complement their lives, because less than a third of online adults believe that the quote unquote metaverse will be good for society. So there are headwinds that brands and the technology companies that are helping to architect and build the metaverse need to overcome to demonstrate to consumers the value that they can get from immersive media.
It's interesting that you say that, Mike, because this contrasts, I think, quite starkly by other studies like the ones from IZEA that was conducted in January of this year that said that almost nearly 60% of Gen Z felt that that this was an important space, and almost the exact same amount of influencers in this space said that they thought that the metaverse was the future of social media. So could there be a generational disconnect, and what do you think will bridge that gap?
So our data as well shows that when we cut it by generation, the younger that you go, the more appetite of intent there is for immersive media experiences in the metaverse. But still, our very recent data that we just did in April, where we asked Gen Z, amongst other generations, whether or not they've heard of or used various immersive platforms. And by the way, we included the likes of Fortnite on that, so some very popular platforms. It was still 36% combined Gen Z and millennial online adults hadn't recently used any of the 11 immersive platforms that we surveyed on. So I 100% agree that the likely audience right now is going to be Gen Z, younger millennials, especially those that are gaming right now, which is the biggest on-ramp for the metaverse because it's already 3D immersive worlds. But you're not going to get all Gen Z ready to accept sort of where the future is going right now.
Yeah, I would agree that it is generational, but I would also say that what we're also seeing from reports from last year that said that a lot of people, because of the changing user behaviors post the pandemic, they found that people are spending more time on these platforms to socialize, not necessarily just to play. Some 78% of young people, when they're on these spaces like Fortnite, tend to use it to socialize rather than to play. And it's funny because even during the pandemic, we asked people, what do you use augmented reality? And multiple studies show that people say, no, I have no idea what it is. But once you actually ask them, have you used a QR code? Have you ever,
Use a
used a
Snapchat
snap
lens.
filter? They'll say, yes, I have. So sometimes I wonder, I mean, apart from the obvious question of platforms, if people really don't understand the concept of the metaverse as such, as much as have differing views about NFTs
Right.
or 3D platforms as also being part of the metaverse. Is it a question of definition? Partially?
It's both a question of definition, but context and understanding. Exactly your point, Catherine, that the metaverse in air quotes is very not tangible at the moment. Like, what really is it, and what does it mean for the average person?
Mm,
But certainly, those individuals that are already gamers that are attending concerts in Fortnite that are using some of these platforms beyond their original intention, like gaming, they're starting to see other use cases that can help augment their lives. And so you
yeah,
have a physical component to your life and you have a virtual component to your life, and the two are interconnected to make up your real life. And
Yeah.
yeah.
that's something that will continue to evolve, albeit slowly, over the course of time. But what's required is that all of the components that comprise this 3D experience layer of the internet have to become way more accessible, a lot less clunky than the headsets that we're wearing right now, and have lots of other entry points beyond just virtual reality and make them simple for mobile enabled apps and desktop as well.
Mike, I love your point about the fact that this definition is something that's still evolving. And I feel like that's one of the challenges that brands are facing is that they also share this confusion. If you want to enter a market, which market is that? If you want to enter a community, who's the ad audience?
Mhm.
And what they don't realize is that certain of these platforms have significant limitations. We did a massive, very successful concert. It was the first Metaverse award show in Roblox, and we're super proud of it. And Lizzo featured in it,
Mhm.
Gail, so big performers. But what was interesting that people don't realize is that you're not allowed to bring in certain materials. You can't bring in video. It's very hard to work in these spaces because it's a demographic that's between 9 and 12 years old. That's their core demographic. It can skew higher up to 25, but that's their core demographic. So you really need to think about it because of the COPA compliancy. You need to, child protection in this space is taken very seriously and rightly so. So I always caution people, well, what is it that you're trying to do? Where do you want to go? Another thing is the marketplaces. You mentioned Decentraland and Sandbox. Big fan of the marketplaces, but they're primarily, platforms used to purchase virtual assets. And that's very good. But the native communities in these things aren't really creating the habits and cultures and rituals that they are in other spaces like VR chat or Roblox, a rec room. So I feel like you need to really step back. The temptation for advertisers is to go with the numbers. I say step back, but look at what the communities are doing inside, who they are before committing to a strategy, platform first. What would you think?
We completely agree with that, right? So the first question that all brands need to ask themselves are, what's my business objective?
Mm.
Yeah.
And I've said this in the report that publishes in a couple days that, if your business objective is, oh, because it's cool and everyone else is doing it, like that's not a good enough business objective. You could
That's true.
argue that maybe it is, right? That I
Yeah.
want to get the press headlines or whatever. But in this day and age where everyone's jumping on the bandwagon, if press headlines is your objective, brands, you've got to work that much harder to do something ridiculously innovative.
Right.
So outside of that, then what are realistic business objectives? And as cliche as it sounds, I mean, it is right now, given the small niche numbers and communities, it really is about trying to test and learn for future use cases as the metaverse matures. And that
Right.
means understanding how a given brand's target audience is experiencing extended reality. What types of things do they want from that brand in those
Right.
extended reality spaces? And then how can those things become optimized and scale over the course of time?
I think you're right to advise caution. And I think that you're absolutely right that the most pertinent question to begin with for a brand entering the metaverse is why. I think the skill set that brands really need to leverage to be successful in these spaces ultimately is community building. I mean, yes, you need all the digital craft skill sets to create the actual experience, but if you can't create reasons for people to come back to continue engaging in your part of the platform in sort of your niche area, then it is going to be like a flash in the pan at best. And I think hopefully what we're going to see is like a maturation of the activations in this space, and the smarter brands will be investing in it over the long term, sort of fostering community over the long term. And yes, I think we can argue all day about like when like how far down the adoption curve are we really with these worlds, with these user behaviors? I don't know, but I think all of the stats, if you take the whole picture, if you take like Roblox and Decentraland and all of the virtual worlds sort of combined, yes, pre-interoperability, they do point to a user behavior that didn't really exist even 5 years ago, and now is becoming increasingly mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, I love that point of view, Henry, and it's, you're quoted in our Forrester report saying that, which is even better. What's old is new again, right? So, you brought up your philosophy on the metaverse is sort of the next evolution of social media.
Yeah.
And, we're all old enough to remember the early days of social media, and it was supposed to be kind of this utopia of brands being able to connect to markets, to connect directly with their consumers and have this community of people that they could co-create with. But over the course of time and in pretty short order, it became nothing more than a targeted advertising channel. So what's different?
I think that this is the fundamental difference between Web 2 and Web 3. As Henry quite rightly mentioned, it's community. Tapping into these communities is very different from Web 2, where we saw an emphasis on content creators and catalysts or influencers. And that really focused in on individuality, narcissism, spectatorship, curated content, and very highly personalized first person narratives and perspectives. And Web3, we're seeing a fundamental shift to these user generated and maintained worlds where fans gather to share and celebrate their love of everything. And it's super exciting when you get that combination right, when you're giving those communities something that they really, really enjoy. And this is one of the beauties of at Media.Monks, we work with so many brands. We really understand their DNA. And how do we then translate it to these worlds in 3D? What does your brand look like, feel like? What is the emotion that it provokes in 3D spaces?
Those same principles, which I 100% agree with, outside of the need to purpose build it for 3D spaces, are the same principles from the social media era of the internet, are the same principles of the mobile era of the internet as well. And brands manage to falter from time to time. There were brands that got it right 100%, but a lot of brands tried to find the shortcuts into reaching their consumers and
Yeah.
relying on advertising and invading those spaces. And that's my point about what happened to social media, because social media in its very founding principles, very similar to Web3, was supposed to all be about community and connection. The book, The Clue Train Manifesto from years ago, set the stage for this, and it just never really manifested to its full potential. So that's why I'm reticent, just looking at past history with brands, that this utopian world that we describe, which sounds amazing and beautiful and wonderful, can truly exist.
This is a kind of quirky question, but I feel like this points to your assertion earlier about the metaverse being accessible and appealing to a relatively narrow demographic at the moment. So the bigger question is, when will the metaverse become relevant and accessible to a larger audience? What are your thoughts, Mike?
Well, I mean, there's two questions, right? So, I mean, that question says, when will our grandparents join? And
I'm
to
just
be
being provocative there.
to be blunt, to be blunt and equally provocative, they're not. They will be dead by the time that this thing matures, and that is the God's honest truth on this. So,
Never rephrase that.
the question then really becomes around, when will we see mass audiences? And that is predicated on things we've already talked about. That is predicated on accessibility of devices, so making them less expensive, making them less intrusive, demonstrating to the everyday consumer the value that they get from immersive media. And from a brand perspective, what's that value exchange?
Mhm.
What do me as a brand, what can I provide using my IP that I can leverage that, consumers love about my brand in the physical world? And how do I express and translate that uniquely and ownably to my brand in the immersive space?
Wonderful. So, Mike, in your report, have you addressed also interoperability? And what is your view on that? Is it a non-starter, or do you really feel that this is the key to opening up and realizing the full potential of the metaverse?
This gets into semantics. So it is a non-starter, right? So without it, from Forrester's point of view, there is no metaverse. And so then the question becomes, and this is a semantic piece, is, or what do you have? Well, you
Mm.
just have extended reality, and that's okay too, by
Mhm.
the way. So for the metaverse to exist, we fundamentally believe that it needs to be interconnected.
In the same way that browsing internet websites, you have the same sort of protocol that everything runs on.
That's right.
And
That is
I could
exactly right.
potentially like buy an asset in one of these worlds and use the same asset or some variation of the same asset in a separate world.
That's right. And,
But
even before that happens, basic interlinking,
Yeah.
would be a good thing. You mentioned you were using an analogy of YouTube versus Facebook, and they're still walled gardens, but they are still interconnected across a set of standardized protocols that live on the web. And
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily happen right now with our metaverse precursors, as we call them.
now here's the $400 million question. Mike, you mentioned earlier that a lot of brands are entering this space because of FOMO, and that's something we're seeing. We're actually seeing it in three different ways. We say it's those who are saying, "Oh my goodness, we have to be there because everyone else is there." The second bucket is, "Hey, we see an opportunity to cash in on this thing. How can we jump in and expand our revenues?" And the third one is the bucket where people are saying, the metaverse Web3 represents a fundamental shift in the way we can do business. How do we capitalize on that long term and potentially across the entire value chain of our business? So, in advising brands, why should brands enter the metaverse? What are your thoughts on that?
It is option three, hands down.
Bing, bing, bing,
So
bing, bing.
that's the right
The
answer,
winner.
Catherine.
I love it.
For $1,000 in
Hopefully more.
Dogecoin. So look, any brand that enters extended reality right now or an immersive space thinking that it's going to be a huge revenue generator for them, they're going to be sorely disappointed.
Right.
With anything, there's going to be an exception. There's going to be
Hmm.
that, bolt of lightning that strikes that's going to be hard to reproduce. But in general, right now, it's not a moneymaker. The
Yeah.
infrastructure is just not set up. The user base, as we've already discussed, isn't there yet.
Right.
And so, I'm all for and support and encourage brands to test and learn right now. I really, really do, because I don't want them to become flat footed as this technology and these opportunities develop. So,
Mm.
don't let yourself get behind, but
Yeah.
just temper your expectations and temper your investments right now.
Yeah, I think a near-term opportunity that brands have activating in the space is simply to be able to create moments of surprise and delight in the customer journey. And that's not necessarily going to be right for every brand. And I think you pointing to the test and learn agenda being the most significant one, I agree with that. But if you consider sort of every digital touch point in a customer journey now, the metaverse is a new canvas that brands can start to go in and sort of imagine new experiences, imagine new ways of kind of creating loyalty and creating engagement and ultimately conversion in that journey. And as a sort of creative company, that's one of the reasons why we're excited about it.
I'm going to ask a really quick question. Mike and Henry, I wonder if you can tell me what are your best activations that you've seen so far? What has really excited you past year?
I, look, I'll give two examples for different reasons, and knowing that these are very nascent right now. So the first one is something that Under Armour did with Steph Curry Flow NFT, and the reason why I like it is because this is a wearable NFT that you're able to wear in Decentraland, the Sandbox, and Gala Games. And so the reason why I chose that as my number one is because it only begins to show this interoperability that we've been discussing around my virtual items coming with me on my avatar. The second
That's a
one,
good one.
the second one that I like is Estee Lauder and an activation they did for Metaverse Fashion Week on Decentraland. They have a product called Advanced Night Repair, and what they did is to say, okay, how do we take this product into the metaverse and express it in a way that makes sense for extended reality? And so, if you have this NFT, your avatar essentially leveled up with powers. It
Yeah.
showed this glow around you. So it took the main feature of the product, and instead of doing the literal physical world thing and putting makeup on your avatar, it did something bigger, and it used the canvas of immersive media to radiate the product feature in a way that was purpose built for immersive media.
And it launched into the TikTok, the glow up. So I love the link of that concept.
Beautifully spoken, Mike. The one I will choose, obviously, I'm going to choose one from the Media.Monks group. Is the partnership that we recently did between Adidas and Ready Player Me. And actually, I'll choose it for the same reasons that you chose your first one with Steph Curry, Mike, because I think it points to. And yes, it points to, it's very nascent still. It points to the potential of an interoperable future. So Ready Player Me, if people don't know the platform, positions itself as a way for users to create a single avatar in a single centralized place that then is usable across multiple metaverses. And we helped to put together a sponsorship activation between Adidas and Ready Player Me. So we released a suite of sort of Oswald personalizable 3D avatars that users were then able to take into other metaverses using the Ready Player Me sort of back-end code that they've created.
Those are both great answers. So, Mike, I wonder if in talking to brands, a lot of them want to know, how do I measure this? What's my ROI? And they come with a social media mindset, meaning that they're wanting specific metrics. What is it that you'd recommend is an ROI for a metaverse experience?
I am getting deja vu because, I was working with brands when social media was just becoming a thing. This was in 2007, and this question came up all the time. And I
Right.
remember thought leaders at the time would say, which I never liked the answer, there is no ROI right now in social media.
Right.
But to a certain degree, what I would say, what should brands expect on the return from their investment? It's learning. It's learning. And it ties back to, as cliche as it sounds, the learning agenda that brands have to use right now. It's not going to be, a 10% increase in sales. It just is not right now. So that's where brands have to be realistic. So go in with an open mind, learn, and then apply those learnings and optimize them for future use cases as this scales.
Mike, I love that you talk about the learning agenda because that's something that we in-house talk to all the time. So we're happy to educate brands about what the metaverse is, really illustrate and break down what it means for them. But then what we always say is, okay, so where do you go from here? Just getting everybody aligned into what it is and what the potential is for their company is sometimes the first step. And then once they're absolutely, convinced and committed to move forward, absolutely, it's about testing the waters because we don't really know what we don't know, right? So we kind of have to establish where we are in these spaces and take a creative leap of faith, if you will, and really try to create something custom that will really engage people in a unique way. Henry, what do you think? Anything
Yeah,
to add?
I'll take the same line. I'll add a little extra urgency to it. I think brands, marketers are in a race to figure out what the playbooks will be in the new era of digital. And yes, we've talked a lot about metaverse. I think metaverse is really only one portion of that, and maybe it's one of the most visible portions of that right now. But I think the analogy with social media is the most pertinent one. We saw social media really drive the last 10 years of growth in marketing, really drive the last 10 years of sort of brand growth and brand success. And it triggered new business models, new ways of engagement, new ways of sort of creating customer conversion journeys. I think we'll see a similar path in virtualization, of which the metaverse will ultimately evolve to be a significant part. And I think the brands that are the first to understand and optimize and really activate in those spaces and places in meaningful ways are going to reap the long-term advantage.
Mike, on behalf of Henry Cowling and myself, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We're really excited to have you join us to talk about your research. And thank you so much for meeting us in the metaverse. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure was all mine. Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
All right.
Mike.
Is your wall still there, Henry? Can you do it?
It's still here, dude.
I can't touch you.
I can't reach.
Thank you so much. Join us next
Take
time.
care, guys.